1 second. For a full second, not a single sound reached my ears, and the whole world was as silent as death. Before my eyes, streaks of green error codes flashed, and the lenses of the high-tech headset shattered into a dense spiderweb of cracks. Through the gaps in the broken glass, I clearly saw two glowing green orbs floating in midair ahead of me. They were a pair of terrifyingly huge eyes. They weren't attached to any visible face, just hanging there in space, barely half a meter from my nose. I strained my eyes wide open, but all I could see beyond the green glow were the lush jungle leaves behind them. It was perfectly camouflaged, blocking the forest behind it completely, yet my eyes could only make out the leaves. Then a deep, rumbling roar erupted. The sound was incredibly loud and heavy, like a massive cement mixer grinding away right next to my ear. Along with it, a foul, nauseating stench drifted through the air. It was a mix of rotting dead fish and shrimp in the mud, blended with the acrid smell of burning plastic, making me want to vomit on the spot. Beneath those green eyes, the space suddenly warped in a strange, rippling motion, and then a massive gaping slit tore open out of thin air. It was a mouth. That mouth was big enough to swallow a pig, packed with rows of white bone spikes. Each spike was as large as an adult's palm, their tips gleaming with a cold, sharp light. This thing didn't give me a single moment to react. The row of giant bone spikes lunged forward and clamped down hard on the head of the comrade beside me. I heard a sharp, piercing crack of plastic. That was his ballistic helmet being crushed under immense pressure. The electronic components and bulletproof fibers inside the headset burst out like popcorn, crackling and popping. Then a dull, muffled crunch of bones being violently compressed and shattered reached my ears. His body crumpled limply to the ground, but his helmet, along with his entire upper torso, vanished into thin air in midair. It felt like part of his body had been swallowed by an invisible, transparent wall. At that moment, the air in that spot began to ripple violently like water. Faintly, a patch of that air revealed a massive piece of skin, covered in coarse black hair and huge warts, looking like a toad magnified 10,000 times. Rewind 3 hours. Back then, we had just jumped out of the helicopter and stepped into this South American jungle. Our mission was to find a missing patrol in the woods. To get a clear view of the jungle, the commander issued each of us a state-of-the-art high-tech headset. It was like an advanced pair of goggles. Once worn, an electronic screen appeared before our eyes. Whenever there was a living thing nearby or an enemy hiding in the brush, a bright red box would automatically pop up on the screen, locking onto the target. We moved in a single file through the muddy, weed-choked ground. The jungle was eerily quiet. Normally, a tropical rainforest this vast should be filled with bird calls and the buzz of insects, but we walked the whole way without hearing a single sound. The squad leader took point. Suddenly, his headset let out a few low, deep beeps over the radio. My screen changed too. In one corner of the otherwise clean display, a few small green spots suddenly appeared. These spots went wild, bouncing up and down frantically in the upper right of my vision. At the bottom of the screen, a line of text flashed. Environmental optical anomaly. I thought it was mud on the lens, so I rubbed my eyes with my right hand. Through the lens, before it shattered, I noticed a large tree ahead looked strange. Its trunk seemed to be slowly thickening. The weirdest part was how fast the bark's texture was shifting. It felt like someone had set up a projector, casting the image of the tree onto another surface. The texture kept twisting and rippling. I stopped and stared hard at that spot. Normally, with the sun overhead, the tree's shadow should stretch backward, but this tree's shadow was reversed, creeping slowly toward us. Over the radio, the second-in-command's breathing was heavy and rough. He said his gear was getting hot to the touch, and the electronic map on his screen was drifting all over the place, completely disoriented. The air around us grew increasingly stuffy and hot. Sticky sweat plastered my camouflage uniform to my back, making me miserable. That foul smell of dead fish mixed with burning plastic. That was when it first drifted lazily into my nose. Everyone immediately spread out, forming a tactical skirmish line. We raised our rifles, fingers locked tight beside the triggers, eyes fixed unblinkingly straight ahead. In that instant, everyone's heads-up display suddenly turned a glaring blood red. The system started spamming errors frantically, a sharp alarm blaring in each person's earpiece, merging into a deafening screech that pounded against our temples. Red warning boxes popped up more and more in my vision, until they completely filled the screen. The warning boxes locked onto a spot, less than 10 meters directly in front of us, an empty patch of ground. I strained my eyes wide, peering past the red frames. That area was barren, nothing but a few withered vines and a pile of trampled leaves, not a single living thing in sight. This couldn't possibly be a system bug. I glanced down at the ground. The dry branches on that empty patch suddenly snapped one by one on their own. The muddy earth seemed to be stepped on by something heavy, sinking into deep pits the size of buckets, appearing out of nowhere. A string of invisible footprints was charging straight toward us at full speed. The squad leader yelled out a command to open fire. Our rifles simultaneously spat out long tongues of flame. Countless bullets sprayed toward that empty space. The bullets hit midair but didn't pierce through. Instead, bright red sparks exploded in the air. It felt like our rounds were slamming into a thick, oil-slicked steel plate. A piercing, grating screech of metal tearing through the air erupted. Then that patch of transparent air suddenly caved inward, outlined by countless sparks, forming the massive silhouette of a humanoid figure. The thing didn't pause for a second. It pushed through our dense hail of bullets, charging straight at us like a heavy-duty truck flooring the gas pedal, heading right for our guts. The machine gunner at the far left of the line didn't make a sound. It all happened too fast. He didn't even have time to let out a scream. It got stuck in his throat. His body lifted off the ground out of nowhere, flying backward into the air. I followed his trajectory and saw the thick ballistic plate on his chest suddenly cave inward, forming a deep dent mid-flight. That plate could stop rifle bullets, but now it looked like a crushed soda can. His body flew a good 15 to 20 feet, before slamming hard into the trunk of a big tree behind us. The tree shook violently from the impact, leaves raining down. His body slid down the trunk, collapsing limply into the mud, motionless. Our fire never let up. I pressed my rifle hard against my shoulder, fingers squeezing the trigger all the way. Bullets streamed out of the barrel one after another. The squad leader beside me was also firing wildly, shell casings clinking as they hit the ground. Our bullets kept pounding into that invisible air. The unseen monster pushed forward through the wall of fire, and things started falling off its surface. What fell was blood, a bright blue, jelly-like viscous liquid. These blue blobs hit the ground, landing on green grass and rotting leaves. The moment they touched down, the grass hissed with white smoke, instantly burning into black char. A foul, acrid smell of burning filled the air. As more and more bullets struck the creature, its outer layer of invisible camouflage finally began to crack. It was like a clear pane of glass, suddenly covered in countless white fractures. I saw a massive tail whip out from the air on the right side. It was covered in dense, black barbs, looking a lot like a crocodile's tail but several times thicker. That barbed tail swept across the ground in midair. Small rocks, mud clumps, and big tree roots all flew up from the sweep, hurtling toward us like cannonballs. I ducked my head behind a tree. A piece of wood, as thick as a human thigh, torn off by the tail, whistled past just above my head. I heard a dull thud to my left. Turning to look, I saw a teammate hit square in the left thigh by that flying chunk of wood. The force of that broken log was immense. Under the impact, his entire thigh bent into a bizarre, unnatural angle. His body instantly lost balance, and he collapsed in agony into the mud. The high-tech AR headset he was wearing fell into a nearby puddle of mud. Half buried in the sludge, the headset screen still flickered frantically with red warning lights. The red glow made the surrounding muddy water shimmer and flash. After taking so many bullets, that monster seemed thoroughly pissed off. Its massive body turned around in the air, though most of its body remained transparent, and I still couldn't make out its full form. I could feel an enormous gust of wind hurtling straight toward my face from the front. It was the massive airflow created, as its bulky frame displaced the surrounding air. The stench of dead fish and burning plastic in the air rushed straight into my skull with that strong wind, stinging my eyes so badly I could barely keep them open. I dug my feet into the muddy ground, my palms slick with sticky sweat, the gun grip so slippery I could hardly hold it. The captain was still shouting something to my right, but his voice was drowned out by the rumbling noise of the monster moving. The ground trembled with each step. Every tremor sent the muddy water jumping upward. That creature, weighing several tons, was flattening and crushing the bushes and vines in its path, one after another. The thick vines snapped with a cracking sound under its feet. I saw several more globs of bright blue liquid splat onto the ground in midair. Those droplets burned small, smoking craters into the mud. Wrapped in that glowing blue liquid, the monster's outline became slightly more visible than before. It was getting closer to me. I could even see the air around it shimmering and distorting from the heat it radiated, like the haze above a summer asphalt road. The comrade with the broken leg, lying in the mud, was desperately clawing at the grass roots with both hands, trying to drag his body backward. He left a long trail in the mud. As he dragged himself, he let out heavy, painful gasps. But the invisible behemoth had already reached him. Under the monster's immense weight, the ground suddenly sank in a large patch, right onto the fallen rifle of that comrade. That alloy rifle, under an unseen force, let out a crack as the entire barrel snapped in half. The magazine inside burst open, scattering golden bullets all over the place, all sinking into the black mud. I stared at that sunken patch of mud, then at the constantly warping light ahead. The thing's foot was as big as a large bucket. It stopped right in front of that comrade with the broken leg. Though its massive shadow was invisible, it completely blocked the red light on the ground. At that moment, my rifle's magazine made an empty chamber click. The bullets were all spent from the frantic firing earlier. My right hand quickly reached for my waist, fumbling for a spare magazine. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to claw at the magazine pouch several times before I could undo the buckle. Just as I was about to shove the new magazine into the gun, another roar, like a cement mixer starting up, came from the air ahead. This sound was louder than any before, rattling my eardrums with pain. The comrade lying on the mud suddenly lifted his head, his eyes fixed on the space above him. His mouth gaped open, as if he wanted to shout my name or yell for the captain to run. But before he could get the words out, a strong downward gust of wind erupted from the empty air above him. That wind blew leaves and mud into a swirling frenzy. I saw his skin pulled back by the force of the gale. Then that massive mouth, splitting open out of thin air, appeared again in midair. A row of palm-sized white bone spikes glinted coldly in the sparse sunlight, plunging straight down toward the defenseless body on the ground. Suddenly, all the gunfire around us stopped. The jungle fell back into that initial dead silence. The crashing and roaring that had pounded our heads vanished without a trace in that instant. My ears rang, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heavy, labored breathing, like a bellows. The comrade with the broken leg lay in the mud a few meters away, letting out one painful groan after another. The invisible behemoth that had sent us scattering seemed to have left. I glanced down at my HUD screen. The dense, blinding red warning boxes that had filled it were now extinguishing one by one. The electronic display flickered a few times before reverting to a safe green. The squad leader slowly poked his head out from behind a large tree to the right. He scanned the area, then signaled for us to converge on him. The few of us still alive scrambled together, crawling and stumbling. Our clothes were soaked through with sweat and mud, our chests heaving violently. The second in command wiped mud from his face with his sleeve and whispered to the squad leader that the thing might be enormous, that it had fled deep into the woods after being badly wounded. He added that its invisibility was probably based on some skin reflection principle, and that all the bullets we'd fired must have pierced its hide, causing it such pain that it ran off. I stayed silent, crouching to look at a patch of grass by my feet. It was covered in pools of bright blue viscous liquid. The liquid had been smoking, scorching the grass black, but now it was changing, fading and thinning bit by bit. I stared hard at a blob of blue jelly. Its surface color drained away completely, until it looked just like ordinary sweat, without even a hint of shine. Something felt off. I slowly raised my head and looked at the surrounding trees. The trunks that had stood straight in the mud now looked strange, all bent with an eerie curve, as if crushed by some heavy weight. I blinked and noticed that the outlines of the trees around us were all quivering slightly. It felt like we weren't in a jungle at all, but inside a huge, transparent glass ball. The air temperature was rising sharply too. What had been just muggy was now scorching hot, like a giant steamer. Every breath I took burned like fire, stifling and suffocating. The stench of dead fish mixed with burnt plastic hadn't dissipated. It was growing stronger, lingering right in front of my nose, unmoving. The squad leader was about to change his magazine when his hand froze midair. I realized it too. The monster had never left. It had just switched to a method we couldn't understand, using its multi-ton body to encircle our entire squad. My mouth opened, but before I could shout a single word, in that instant, the high-tech AR headset on my head completely fried. A thick plume of black smoke burst from my small screen, acrid and direct, shooting straight into my nose, accompanied by a piercing, dense static noise. The green display on the whole screen shook violently. With a pop, the screen went pitch black, showing nothing. The black smoke stung my eyes. I yanked off the head strap with my left hand and hurled the useless piece of junk into the mud at my feet. My eyes were finally free of those plastic lenses. I opened them wide and looked up at the sky above. What I saw turned my legs to solid wood on the spot, leaving me unable to move even a toe. The dense canopy above us had no green leaves at all. It was a vast expanse of countless, slowly writhing black scales. These scales were incredibly thick, each one the size of a wash basin. They pressed against each other, undulating and squeezing gently in the air like waves. The monster's body wasn't 10 meters long. It was as huge as a concrete house standing in the woods. It had braced itself tightly between 4 surrounding trees. Its belly, so wide I couldn't see its edges, was like a giant lid, trapping our entire squad beneath it in the mud. I saw its black underbelly suddenly split open with countless tiny slits. Those slits opened simultaneously within a second. From each one emerged a large eye. These eyes were bizarre, with no white at all, just a round, bright yellow pupil. Hundreds of those yellow pupils stared down at us, unblinking. The captain stood to my right. He raised his rifle, the muzzle aimed straight at the black scales above. His finger had just touched the trigger. At that moment, the giant beast's belly suddenly pressed downward with incredible speed, stirring up a massive black gust of wind. The wind hit me like a solid wall, slamming into my chest and flipping me over into the muddy ground. My back crashed hard against a tree root on the ground, forcing a sharp gasp of air out of me. Lying in the mud, I craned my neck back as far as I could. I watched helplessly as the captain's rifle barrel was grazed by a piece of black skin falling from above. the thickened alloy steel barrel. The moment it touched that skin, twisted and snapped like a piece of boiled soft noodle. The entire rifle was instantly ruined. The captain, gripping the bent stock, was yanked back several steps by the force and landed on a pile of rotting leaves. The weight and hardness of this thing defied all common sense. The sturdy trees around us, which had been fine moments ago, began to emit a dull, creaking groan under the pressure of its belly. A thick tree, over a decade old, suddenly split open in the middle of its trunk. Countless wood chips sprayed from the crack. Under the immense weight, the trunk started to lean slowly into the small circle where we stood. The second in command was lying about 2 meters away from me. His gun had long fallen aside, and he was digging his hands deep into the mud, his fingernails filled with black sludge. He pressed his ear to the ground, listening intently. As he listened, his body trembled uncontrollably. Sounds began to emerge from beneath the earth. The dull thuds of the monster's claws stepping on deeper ground, crushing rocks in the soil. Thud, then another thud. Each vibration sent the rifle bullets on the ground rolling and clinking in the muddy water. I saw a black scale fall from the sky, landing right by the captain's foot. It sank 10 centimeters deep into the mud. The edge of the scale had a ring of serrated teeth, still faintly opening and closing in the air, as if breathing. The temperature in the air was now unbearably hot. Sweat dripped down my forehead into my eyes, stinging them shut. The stench of dead fish mixed with burnt plastic had thickened into something like glue, sticking to my throat. Every breath I took felt like sand scraping my windpipe. The captain dropped the bent, useless rifle. His left hand fumbled over his body, pulling out a pistol and yanking the slide back with force. A click. The sound of a round being chambered rang out crisp in the dead silence of the woods. But then, the thousands of yellow eyes above all shifted at once. In an instant, every pupil locked onto the small pistol in the captain's hand. That massive black belly began to sink downward on a large scale. Within a second, all surrounding light was blocked out. The shade that had let in sunlight turned into a pitch-black abyss. I could barely see my own fingers. All I could hear was the rustling of those black scales rubbing against each other overhead. Loud, dense, like tens of thousands of giant beetles crawling above us. The second-in-command's pant leg was caught on a broken vine on the ground. As he tried to pull it off, he let out a strange, high-pitched squeal like a kitten's. His hands shook so badly he couldn't muster any strength, and after several attempts, he still couldn't break the vine. The monster's black skin had already pressed down to less than half a meter above the captain's head. I saw the captain's boonie hat get knocked off by the rough texture of the black skin. His hair whipped wildly backward in the hot wind stirred up by the beast. He raised the pistol and fired repeatedly at the black mass. The gunshots sounded muffled at such close range. Flames spat from the muzzle, illuminating the black skin for a second. The bullets hit the scales without leaving even a white mark. They ricocheted off, striking the surrounding wood and sparking bursts of fire. The colossal creature seemed utterly unfazed by the pistol's impact. Its body continued to press down, the massive black flesh completely filling the gap between two large trees. The only space left for us to move was a small, narrow pit in the ground. The pistol in the captain's hand kept firing, pop, pop, pop. After firing the last bullet, a small puff of white smoke drifted from the muzzle, and the slide locked back firmly. Right at that moment, the radio receiver erupted with a burst of piercing screams and crackling static. The noise was so loud it sent a sharp, throbbing pain deep into my ears. My partner was completely off. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, yanking his neck back, and pressing his body as far back as he could. His hands clawed frantically at his tactical vest, ripping off spare magazines one by one and hurling them into the black, muddy ground. Golden rifle rounds scattered everywhere, caked in dark mud. After tossing the magazines, he yanked a long combat knife from his waist. Instead of running to either side, He raised the steel blade and swung wildly at the dense, writhing scales overhead. The knife tip carved white streaks through the air, slamming hard into the monster's belly. The blade struck the tough scales with a dull, clanging thud. Each strike split the web of his thumb, and veins bulged across the back of his hand. The massive creature's body kept sinking. The only cover we had, a few trees so thick it took several people to wrap their arms around them, finally gave out. A harsh, muffled cracking sound came from the middle of the trunks. With a loud snap, one tree trunk shattered in the middle. Countless palm-sized splinters and sharp bark rained down on our heads like a storm. A piece of wood hit my shoulder, and the pain numbed half my body instantly. All escape routes and gaps around us were now completely blocked by the giant beast's enormous black limbs. The sky above was pitch black. We were trapped like prisoners in a slowly shrinking black iron box, forced to huddle into the shrinking gaps of mud. I saw my partner crawling forward when a thick branch, as wide as a bucket, fell straight onto his back. The immense weight slammed his upper body into the black mud. He couldn't move. His legs kicked desperately outside, and his hands clawed at the dirt and rotting leaves. His mouth let out inhuman cries, and mud sprayed from his nose. I reached out my left hand to grab his clothes, but my legs felt as heavy as if they were filled with cement. No matter how hard I pushed back, I couldn't move forward an inch. The stench of dead fish and burning plastic in the air reached its peak. That smell clung like sticky glue to my eyes and nose, making it hard to keep them open. My stomach churned violently, and acid surged into my throat, spilling from the corners of my mouth. At that moment, the team leader slammed his empty pistol against the monster's belly. He turned and dug his fingernails into the flesh of his thigh, drawing blood. He used this to steady himself. Running was out of the question. This thing could mimic all the light and trees around it, and all our high-tech AR gear was now scrap metal on the ground. The only way to deal with this behemoth was to exploit its own biological traits. I pressed my head flat against the ground. My eyes caught a small puddle of bright blue, viscous liquid nearby. It was slowly turning transparent like ordinary sweat, but I remembered clearly. When the bullets hit the monster's body, those blue jellies, in the brief moment they touched the air, generated intense heat and huge clouds of white smoke. That could only mean one thing. The liquid inside this thing reacts violently with certain air components. It wasn't completely invulnerable. My left hand slowly reached behind my waist. My fingers touched a hard, cold metal object. It was the last 2 incendiary grenades hanging from my tactical belt. When these grenades explode, the chemicals inside burn at thousands of degrees, hot enough to melt through steel plates. I gripped the pull rings of the 2 grenades tightly with one hand, while twisting my head around to make a forceful, direct gesture to the only teammate left beside me. First, I pointed up at the massive belly, slowly pressing down inch by inch above our heads. Then, I brought the 2 incendiary grenades in my hand right in front of his eyes and shook them hard. I had to wait. I had to wait for that 1 second when this giant creature opened its mouth. That mouth, lined with huge white bone spikes, was the only spot on its entire body not covered in thick black scales, and the only place without the protection of its invisible shell, soft flesh. We had to use our own bodies to lure this thing in, to draw it to the closest possible range where it would be most vulnerable to damage. The teammate sat in the muddy water. He looked at the grenades in my hand, then at my face. His teeth ground together with a grating sound, and the corners of his eyes looked ready to split. He didn't say a word. With his mud-caked right hand, he grabbed the rifle that had fallen beside him and shoved the safety lever all the way down to the fully automatic position. He braced his elbows against the ground and slowly pushed himself up from the muck. His gun barrel pointed straight at the black mass of flesh that was now nearly touching our noses. In that moment, the colossal beast hovering above us finally moved. Its body, as massive as a concrete building, came crashing down toward the muddy pit where we were hiding, with a force that seemed ready to crush the entire earth. As it descended, the teammate sitting next to me suddenly let out a roar. His voice was so loud it drowned out the sound of trees splintering around us. Screaming at the top of his lungs, he used both arms to brace against the ground and forced his upper body out of the black muck. He raised his rifle, aiming the muzzle straight up. His finger squeezed the trigger and held it down without letting go. Rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat. A red tongue of flame, a meter-long shot from the rifle's muzzle. Countless gleaming yellow bullets tore out of the barrel, hammering into the black scales on the monster's belly. The bullets struck the hard scales, sparking a blinding shower of red sparks. Those sparks flew wildly through the dark forest, flashing across the creature's entire massive belly. The enormous monster, hit by that dense volley of bullets, paused in midair for a moment. Then from beneath its thick hide came a deep, rumbling gurgle, like hundreds of kilograms of magma churning violently underground. After that sound, the beast hidden in the darkness seemed fully enraged by our defiance. A massive black crack suddenly split open in the dark mass of flesh above us. That gaping maw, lined with white bone spikes, appeared once more over our heads. Its mouth was wide open. I looked up and saw it was over 2 meters across, pitch black inside, with no end in sight. The white bone spikes around its edges were thick, each one dripping with sticky, glistening strands of transparent liquid. Those strands fell like thick glue ropes, plopping down into the mud below. The monster's giant mouth aimed at the teammate still firing wildly, and with a powerful stench of rot, it lunged straight for his head. It came down so fast it kicked up a harsh black wind in the air. That wind slammed into the ground, sending leaves and mud flying everywhere. Now, my right hand clenched the 2 incendiary grenades hanging at my waist. My fingers hooked into the iron rings on top, and with every ounce of strength I had, I yanked them out. Click! The pins of both grenades came free. I didn't have time to think. My left hand pushed off the ground, and with a twist of my waist, I lifted my upper body out of the mud. My right hand held the 2 grenades, already spewing white smoke, and aimed at the gaping maw above, lined with white bone spikes. With the greatest force I'd ever mustered, I hurled them. As my right arm swung, the joint popped with a sharp crack from the sheer effort. 2 grenades traced 2 small black arcs through the air, plunging with deadly precision deep into that gaping, enormous mouth. 1 second later, boom! A deafening blast, so loud it nearly knocked me unconscious, erupted inside the monster's mouth. The blinding flash of the grenade explosion tore apart all the surrounding darkness in an instant. A massive ball of white and red flames, bright as the sun, burst violently out through the gaps in the monster's jaws. Those flames, burning at thousands of degrees, cracked and shattered the huge white bone spikes inside its mouth one by one. Countless fragments of white bone, like tiny cannonballs, shot out from the creature's mouth in a chaotic spray. The only part of this giant beast's body not protected by scales was its mouth. These 2 incendiary grenades, detonating inside its organs, dealt it devastating damage. Its once perfectly concealed invisible shell was ripped open by the violent explosion, leaving a gaping black hole as big as a bucket. Through that hole, I finally saw the monster's true form clearly. Beneath its skin were thick, pipe-like black veins, pulsing violently as if blue liquid was surging through them. Its flesh was a sickly, dead gray, densely covered with sharp, bony spikes. This colossal creature let out its first piercing, agonized scream since the battle began. The sound was deafening. It was like 100 heavy trains screeching to a halt on the tracks at once. The sharp noise so intense that warm, sticky, clear fluid started trickling from my ears. My head buzzed with ringing, and my vision blurred with layers of black afterimages. Its massive, multi-ton body, reeling from the explosion in its mouth, began to thrash and roll wildly in midair. As it rolled, its thick, telephone pole-like tail, covered in black barbs, lashed out indiscriminately at everything around it. The tail moved so fast it left black streaks in the air. Smack! It slammed into a large tree on the left. That towering tree, so thick it would take 3 people holding hands to encircle it, was snapped in half by a single blow from the monster's tail, splintering into countless wooden fragments. The tree crashed down onto the muddy ground, gouging out a pit several meters deep. Then, with another flick, the tail struck the deputy's body lying in the mud. Under the monster's immense force, the deputy was sent flying off the ground. His body sailed over 10 meters through the air before smashing into a dense thicket of bushes, where it lay still. The teammate, who was still firing after emptying his last round, was grazed by the monster's massive, thrashing black leg. That unstoppable physical force slammed him like a ragdoll into a mud wall on the right. His rifle flew from his hands on impact, and he slid down the wall, sinking into a pile of fallen leaves. I lay at the bottom of the pit. The massive shockwave from the grenade explosion, at such close range, hit me square in the chest like a sledgehammer. I felt 2 of my ribs crack with a distinct snap. My body lost control, tumbling several times across the rocky, muddy ground. My right arm and left thigh scraped against stones, tearing my clothes into strips and leaving my skin raw and burning. The entire jungle had become a living hell in that moment. As the monster thrashed wildly, the remaining large trees around us were snapped and crushed one by one under its massive body. Countless broken branches, boulders the size of wash basins, and clouds of black mud rained down like a storm from the sky. A sharp branch, 2 meters long, plunged straight into the mud right by my ear. The gust of wind it created sliced a long gash across my face. The monster rolled on the ground a dozen times, and from the large hole in its belly, bright blue viscous liquid began gushing out in wide streams. Wherever this liquid touched, all the grass and trees within dozens of meters turned into charred black powder within seconds. Scorching white smoke filled the entire muddy pit. My throat was completely swollen from the smoke reeking of dead fish, making even exhaling a struggle. That massive beast, after spewing its last puff of ember-laced black smoke, suddenly convulsed violently a few times in the mud. Its thick black limbs gouged deep, trenches a meter deep into the ground. Then, its enormous black tail swayed weakly in the air twice before slamming down with a thud onto a pile of splintered wood, motionless at last. The surrounding broken trees stopped toppling. Except for the faint crackling from the charred trunks, the chaotic battlefield finally, slowly, fell silent again in that moment. I don't know how long passed before the fire scorched. Crackling bits of wood around me extinguished one by one. I pressed my left hand hard against the ground, forcing my body out of the rocky mud pit bit by bit. My entire right arm was now completely useless. Even the slightest movement sent piercing pain through the bones in my shoulder. The left side of my face was covered in sticky blood, dripping down from my chin and the corner of my eye with a steady patter. I staggered to my feet. The beast, as big as a house, was gone. Where it had fallen, only a massive trench over 10 meters long and half a meter deep remained in the mud. The long groove was filled with black soil scorched by intense heat. In the gaps between some dark clumps of dirt, small patches of blue flesh, not yet turned transparent, still lingered. The entire surrounding jungle had been reduced to rubble. All the towering trees were snapped in half at their midsections, with sharp bark and splintered wood scattered everywhere. Dragging my right leg, which had no strength left, I shifted all my weight onto my left leg and slowly, step by step, moved toward the helicopter evacuation point. As I passed a broken tree that had been crushed flat, I stopped. In the muddy ground lay half a shattered high-tech AR headset, caked with black mud. Behind the cracked lens, now webbed like a spider's web, a faint green electronic light still flickered weakly. I looked down at the broken piece of metal, lifting my mud-caked left foot. I used the last of my strength to stomp hard on the headset. Crack! The lens and electronic components were crushed to bits under my sole, sinking deep into the black muck. That faint green light went out completely. I raised my head again, and sunlight, piercing through the gaps in the broken canopy above, shone straight onto my face.